and in England, we have what's called the Freedom of Information Act. I don't know if you have one here, but it means that you're supposed to be able to apply to see any document about anything, and it should be brought into the public domain if you apply to see it. Well, many people have tried to see information about UFOs by using the Freedom of Information Act. And the good news is, if you approach the authorities using the Act, they will release the documents. The bad news is that when they release the documents, what you get is that. So, anything you actually wanted to read is, of course, literally covered up in the interests of national security. So they have this loophole where they don't have to tell you any of the important bits. But why not? If there is nothing to hide, why not let us see the documents? So clearly, there is no question that with the UFO phenomenon, whether you believe they are extraterrestrial or whether you believe it's just all secret military technology, clearly they don't want us to know about it. And that's where you have to give up on getting the authorities to share the information and then turn to civilian testimony, speak to normal people, if you like, who claim to have had encounters with alien beings. And over the years, there's been many tales of people who have met aliens, seen UFOs, been taken up on board or abducted, as some would say. And some have reported having strange operations carried out on them by beings like this. Here we see Betty in Barney Hill. They were one of the first widely reported tales of alien abduction. And in 1961, they were driving across New York State in America, they claim, and they saw a UFO, and suddenly they were up on board and met beings like this. And here we see Betty years later with a model she made, showing something like what they encountered. Now, what is interesting here is that there are thousands and thousands of accounts of people who claim to have been taken on board spaceships. And it's very easy to debunk and laugh at, and yet when people with serious credentials have investigated this, it turns out that maybe there's more to the story. For instance, John E. Mack was a Harvard psychiatry professor, now sadly dead, but he spent many years investigating alien abduction cases. He faced a lot of ridicule for doing it, but he was skeptical. He thought it was all in the mind. But after interviewing hundreds of abductees, he came to the realization that whatever was going on, one thing was clear, that they believed it was a real experience. They weren't fantasizing, they weren't making it up. It was to them as real as this room is to us now. And he began to realize that whether or not it was some strange psychological, archetypal experience, or whether it really was literally occurring, almost didn't matter. You needed to look at what experiences were coming through from these encounters and what information was being gained from these encounters, because even if this was just something welling up through the collective consciousness, it still needed looking at. And what is interesting here, and what takes us on to the next part of the talk now really, is that one of the recurring themes is that again and again people that are taken on board these ships, as they believe, are shown visions of the future. And that these beings either tell them, or show them on a screen, or project psychically images of things that would happen to our planet in the near future. And there's been a number of people, like Billy Meyer, or John King, or Whitley Strieber, who've come back and written down what they remembered being told. And a lot of these things they wrote down have come true. For instance, some things like 9/11, big events, were shown to many abductees, and they seem to know that this was already going to happen. And this ties in with much information that's coming in from lots of other sources. Because again and again these days we hear about this idea that maybe some big change is imminent. And one of the recurring themes is that there will be a huge change to our world due to happen about now and in the next few years. And this is something that people are talking about again and again. And this is just one source. If you go back a little bit earlier to the early part of the 20th century, clairvoyants and mediums, psychics like Edgar Cayce, who we see here, made a number of predictions that the world at the end of the 20th and the beginning of the 21st century would undergo a huge transformation. And various things that Cayce and other psychics have written down have come true. He accurately predicted the Second World War, the Cold War and the rise of communism. A number of things that he seemed intuitively to know. Not everything was right, but enough things to make you think, well, maybe this should be looked at. And psychics and mediums all around the world for years now have been saying there's going to be something huge that changes the whole nature of the world. Ultimately, everything will be improved, will be better afterwards. But it will be an uncomfortable transition in between. But again and again, it's kind of this time period where we are today that has been pinpointed. Now this, of course, for many people ties in with the prophecies concerning the year 2012. And there's much conflicting information about 2012 and why that date matters. But the key thing is this, that many people believe that an ancient time cycle recorded by many different cultures around the world holds the key to, if you like, a message from the past. Now, most famously, people speak about the Maya prophecies. But actually, although the Maya recorded this cycle of time in their calendrical systems very accurately, it's not just the Maya. The Maori in New Zealand record the same time cycle. The Chinese encoded it into the I Ching. Various Native American tribes have clear links to this same cycle of time. So what's that about? This cycle seems to be 5,125 years. And there are some arguments about when it really began and when it really ended. But many people believe, if you work out the old calendars with today's calendars, that we're just about to enter a time when that time period ends and begins again. And there are various prophecies around the world which say that when this occurs, something big happens to the world. Now, whether there's any truth to it or not, the fact is lots of people believe it. And the turning of the next cycle, in many people's opinion, is 21st of December 2012. And Hollywood has now leaped on the bandwagon with the new movie 2012, which is all big, apocalypse, earthquakes. And of course, some people do believe this could occur. But the other side of the 2012 prophecies is that many of the prophecies say that we will all be collectively transformed, that our species will raise to a new level of consciousness, and that it will ultimately be a very positive thing. So all of this is currently milling about in our collective consciousness. There's so much feeling that something's about to happen. But of course, prophecies and predictions are nothing new. If you look back at the Bible, packed with prophecy and prediction. But religious prophecy is maybe not always in the ancient past. What I think is interesting is that a lot of all this talk from aliens and psychics and 2012 people ties in with something which occurred in Portugal, with Fatima, in 1917. And many of you will know of this, but what is key to this, for those that don't know, is that on October the 13th, 1917, one of the most famous apparitions of what seemed to be the Virgin Mary appeared to thousands of people. Now, there have been, of course, many accounts of religious figures appearing in front of thousands of people over the years. But what marks the Fatima story out as different is that, for once, there's some very good evidence. Now here we see the three children, poor shepherd children, who began to have visions of at first an angel and then this glowing female being. That in fact only in their last encounter did this being announce itself as Our Lady of the Rosary. She never used the name Mary, by the way, but it is